Sure, I appreciate everybody coming today. Today we have Courtney Austin. She is with the BNSF, the railroad company, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're a financial auditor?
Right now I'm a manager.
Manager, okay.
Manager, yeah.
And she's going to go over some information today that I guess is about fraud and those types of things. So it'll be really kind of interesting, but we appreciate her being here today. And if you give her a nice round of applause, please take a minute.
Is this, okay, can you hear me okay? Oh. I am Courtney, like he said, and I'm here to talk to y'all about the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I know some of you have been involved quite a bit and are more knowledgeable, but they wanted me to come and just give some more background and answer any questions you all have. I have been a CFE for over 10 years and also been involved with the Fort Worth chapter of the ACFE about that amount of time. So I'm currently a board member, but I've been the treasurer, the president of the chapter, several different roles. So there's also a Dallas chapter, but we have the Fort Worth chapter. It's a little smaller, and it's been a really great part to be involved in. So I thought I would talk to you all about the ACFE organization itself, the Certified Fraud Examiner credential, in case there's any questions about that. Also just a little bit about fraud and what kind of person commits fraud, and some resources and just the types of paths that CFEs go into for their careers. But if you have questions, feel free to stop me. Hopefully you all can see that, but the ACFE is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, like I mentioned, and it was founded almost 40 years ago. There was a conversation between Dr. Wells and Dr. Cressy. Dr. Wells was a former FBI agent and a CPA, so he had retired from the FBI and was just an accountant. And then he was speaking at an office in Austin, Texas with Dr. Cressy, who is was a criminologist, and they were talking about the growing trend of white-collar crime and how there are a lot of people that are investigators and have the law enforcement background, and then there are obviously a lot of accountants, but there wasn't really a type of profession or a type of credential similar to the CPA to qualify people to investigate white-collar crime. So they wanted something that would combine the law enforcement background with the accounting background. And it took a couple years, but Dr. Wells and several other people founded the ACFE, like I said, almost 40 years ago, and it's headquartered in Austin, but it is a global organization, so it's all over the globe. They do have local chapters that are run by volunteers like myself. So they have 95,000 members in the organization worldwide. About 60,000 of them are certified fraud examiners, but you don't have to be certified. Some of them are working on getting certified, but some are just happy to be members, and they provide a lot of training and resources to their members, but also to the general public. So I'll have some resources on another slide. Yes?
What does it take to be a CFE?
Sure. So it's a 4-part exam similar to the CPA exam. It's not as hard as the CPA exam, I think, but I know some law enforcement officers that have taken it and they've struggled with the accounting side versus, they understand the law enforcement side. And whereas I was really happy with the accounting side, I have an accounting degree, but I struggled with the law side. So it's a 4-part exam, and you have to pass all 4 parts. It's kind of similar to the CPA exam, but it's a law section and then a section on accounting, just very basic accounting and kind of the fraud schemes, a section on investigation, so interview tactics, evidence, best practices, things like that, and then also a section on the risks of fraud, how to spot the risks and the red flags, and kind of more detecting and deterring fraud. So they also have a point system. You can't just pass the exam, you have to meet certain other requirements, but they have this point system where You may have a bachelor's degree or a bachelor's and a master's degree, that gets you a certain number of points. But you may have no degree and have 20, 30 years experience that's relevant, and that may get you points. So there's different avenues to meet the points requirement, and then, like I said, pass that 4-part exam and you're good to go. I had a bachelor's degree. I had to have at least 2 years work experience, and I had to pass the exam and some other things. So I passed it pretty quickly after I graduated, and I've just been learning ever since. So you do have to pay annual dues. It's about $200 a year to the ACFE, and you have to do your continuing education, which is 20 hours a year. 2 hours have to be ethics, and then some fraud credits, and so you just have to keep up to date on training and know what the current trends are and things like that. They don't want someone to get certified and then never learn new things, basically. So what is fraud? I put a definition up here from the ACFE's website, and when I would teach people about fraud or do fraud awareness training, I would basically just say fraud is theft by deception. It is not somebody walking straight up to a store and taking something and walking out. There is some kind of scam or con or lies involved. So fraud is theft, but there's also that deceptive element. A lot of times we think of things that affect us. Maybe it's identity theft or some kind of scam artist trying to reach us on the phone or via email or via mail. But a lot of companies also have their own teams, like myself, that investigate internal fraud and fraud that people are trying to commit against that company as well. So cybersecurity is a big growing issue, but even just employees cheating on their overtime or their company credit card, or some of those bigger trends like Enron. It could be small, it could be big. So I did put some stats at the bottom. There's basically 3 categories where they categorize the different fraud schemes into. One of them is asset misappropriation, which is someone taking the company's assets. That could be an employee or a third party that's not working for the company. And then for us individually, that could be somebody that is taking our money, and that is the most common. They had, as of earlier this year, that's 89% of all the fraud schemes is something to do with taking assets from a person or a company or misusing those assets. It is the most common, but it's not very much money on average per case. So they put $120,000 on average per that type of fraud. The second kind is corruption, which is basically just means there's more than one person involved. That is going to sometimes overlap with asset misappropriation or that third category. So that's why if you're a math nerd like me and you try to add up the 3 percentages, it is over 100%. And that's because some of these overlap. There's one person acting alone, or 2 people, or 5 people, we don't know. So some of the times you may have a fraud scheme that involves all 3 categories or 2 or 1. And that third category is just somehow falsifying financials or records. And so that could be, like what I talked about at Enron, that was a really big one. Maybe it's not even for their own benefit. They're trying to help the company, and they're falsifying the financial records of that company to make it look better for shareholders. And so there's a lot of different kinds of frauds. They have on their website a very large, what they call fraud tree, of just all the different types of schemes they've identified. And they have a manual that's, over 1,000 pages long that you study when you're taking the exam, and it goes through each scheme. It's kind of a dangerous manual. It goes through each scheme, how you would do it. If this doesn't work, they would do this. If this didn't work, they would do this. Here's how you would look for it. So it's a very detailed manual. In the wrong hands, it could be bad. And sometimes they do actually have certified fraud examiners that commit fraud and end up being, banned. And so that is the other thing that a CFE has to do is they have to follow a code of ethics and make sure that they are not in trouble with the law or other ethical issues. So if that is reported, then they lose their credential and they lose their membership in the organization. I've gotten a couple emails before of someone in Tarrant County, was charged, and are they a member of your chapter? If so, kick them out, but thankfully they were not, but that occasionally happens. So that's a little bit about fraud. And I also put in the top right corner what we call the fraud triangle. So this is the three elements that have to be present for someone to commit fraud. I work for BNSF Railway, like they said, and I worked in their fraud department for 8 years. And I investigated things that were $200. I investigated things that were over $1 million. And it always was the same story. It was at least one person, and they met all three of these elements. And this is actually, I mentioned Dr. Cressy, the criminologist who helped have that conversation that started the ACFE. This was something he built. So Dr. Cressy developed this fraud triangle by interviewing convicted white-collar criminals to figure out how are they different from violent criminals and what drives them. And so the three elements that have to be present, one is a pressure in their life or at work. Usually it's something that causes them to need money, right? So I've seen people that just are living outside their means and they just want more money. They're greedy. I've seen people that have a hardship, that maybe their wife or their spouse is very ill, maybe they're going through a divorce or a custody issue and they need the money for that. I've seen people that have addictions or gambling, drugs, whatever. So there's lots of things that can happen in someone's personal life that might motivate them to find ways to get more money. And then obviously there's also sometimes pressures that people have at work. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their bonus, or they're trying to get more bonus. So sometimes people just do things to make themselves look better at work. But we all have pressures in our lives, obviously, but we don't all do this. So the other elements are opportunity. They need to have some kind of means where they can commit the fraud. Either that's access to someone's bank account that is not theirs, or a credit card that they found, or maybe their employer's credit card, access to money at their employer, or some kind of authorization. Maybe I have the authority to connect with new vendors at work and sign contracts and sign invoices and get them paid. So they have some kind of opportunity that's given to them that they could use responsibly, or they could misuse and use for their own benefit. But the third element of the triangle is what's most important, and that's their rationalization, where they've had this pressure in their life, they've had this opportunity that they've held off on doing something, but they get this idea in their head of, I need it, and I'm going to rationalize it this way. So I've interviewed a lot of people. Sometimes they never admit to it, or they just say it was an accident that I did it, 50 times. That was an accident. But the few that have admitted to it, they say usually something along the lines of, I didn't think the company would miss it. It's a big company, multi-billion-dollar company. I took a few $100s. I needed it. I didn't get my raise like I wanted. They just rationalize it. I've heard other people were doing things. I reported them. They didn't get in trouble. It was just very demoralizing, and I finally did it too. So they have some way they've rationalized it to themselves, whether that makes a lot of sense or not to others. But that's really what drives somebody to commit fraud, is those three elements. So I put some resources on here that I just think are interesting. A lot of them are with the ACFE, just because they are the leading research arm for our profession. They have, as far as free resources, these are all the free resources. You don't have to be a member of the ACFE to get these. They have a bi-monthly newsletter. They have a podcast where they post it on YouTube. But you can go to www.acfe.com to see what resources they have. Like I said, they have quite a few. They have a bookstore where they highlight a lot of books written by their members or about fraud. Some books are written by convicted fraudsters. And so it's just interesting. Some of them are educational, learning how to catch certain types of fraud. They do have a report they do every 2 years called the Report to the Nations. That was some of these screenshots here at the bottom, that bar graph, that they update that every 2 years. What they do for Report to the Nations is they interview all of their members that want to participate and ask them, what have you seen these past 2 years? How much was it? How big was it? How long did it go? What caused it? What kind of fraud was it? And they take all that information, even information about the fraudster, you know, how long had they worked here? Were they a man or woman? And how old were they? And they compile all that. So they have a pretty lengthy Report to the Nations that I keep up to date with. That comes out every 2 years on the even years. So this 2024 was the most recent, and then they'll have one next year as well. But I really enjoy the podcast that they have. And then I put some other podcasts down there that most of them are on YouTube. The Perfect Scam is by AARP. So they talk more about what can affect us, you know, as consumers, as just individual people, and I think that's a pretty interesting podcast. And then there's another one called Fraudish, and it's by a lady who, she researches women that commit fraud. She's very interested in how those are different than the men that commit fraud, but she talks about all kinds of things, and she has those on YouTube and Spotify. And then the third one is the Data Sleuth. I think that one's also pretty interesting, but I don't keep up with all of them, but you can go on YouTube and see certain ones might jump out to you as more interesting, and you can watch those or listen to them. Any questions so far? Yes.
Hi there. So one of my guilty pleasures is I listen to these podcasts, and one of them is called Red Collar, and it's about crimes that were committed. They're financial frauds, but they had like murder linked into it. Do you ever get that far into anything, or is yours more just strictly the financial part of it?
Yes, I am the typical, person that I find true crime and all crime fascinating, and I just want to understand why people do it.
Yeah.
I've had people in my family that were victims of crime, and so it's just I guess a fascination with why do people do that, what drives them to do that. So, and it is interesting when you have someone that is a violent criminal but also did this, which one started first, kind of learning that side. So I only put the fraud ones up here, but there's definitely a lot of podcasts out there about just criminology in general and behavior.
Well, great, thank you.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like the truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, I hear some of these stories, and it's just like, really?
Mm-hmm.
It is really out there.
There's a lot out there, a lot of information. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting, I think, even movies. There's obviously movies about Enron and Health South and WorldCom and some of these other big cases. There was a lady who was mayor of a town in, I think, Illinois, and there's a movie about her called All the Queen's Horses. She stole millions of dollars from the city over a decade, just as the mayor. So there's fraud everywhere, sadly. There's fraud in companies, whether it's internal or people attacking the company from the outside. There's, sometimes fraud in, local government, but obviously a lot of fraud in the federal government. I put just kind of some information on where do CFEs work. They work everywhere. Everybody needs them. We talked about, there's a lot of fraud and a lot of crime. So on the left-hand side, obviously we think of the big four firms and all the smaller firms. They used to just kind of focus on, reporting and audits, the kind of the basic big four type things, but they have really started to understand that companies don't always have a dedicated fraud team, or sometimes they need someone totally independent. If you remember what happened at Wells Fargo, their own fraud team had failed to do something about the internal fraud where people were making bank accounts for people without their knowledge, and so they had to hire an external firm to do that investigation because they no longer trusted their own people. Or maybe it's a small company that doesn't have those resources, so they've started branching out into those services and doing forensic work or consulting work. Then you also have what I would call industry, so just working for a company like I do. I work for BNSF Railway. We have people that work for banks and work for just other local companies, Lockheed and Capital One and some of these other local companies, they all have either an ethics or compliance department or a fraud department, and also just internal auditors. So at BNSF, we have internal audit and fraud team, but they work hand in hand. And we have a company hotline. The Enron scandal caused all publicly traded companies to have a hotline. So I think it's been a good thing. And then there's a lot of, like I said, focus within law enforcement and government. There's a lot of fraud in the government sometimes. So I've met CFEs that work for usually the county or federal police, but there are some local departments that have their own white-collar crime investigators. It's been difficult, I think, with a lot of the budget cuts. I met one of the white-collar detectives for Arlington, but he said they'd cut way back, and they just kind of refer people to the Tarrant, sheriff's office. So the sheriff's office has a white-collar division. I live in Benbrook. We don't have a white-collar detective, but we can go to Tarrant County if we need to. So there's a lot of different levels where they can have a white-collar detective or even just regular detectives that want that credential just to have that background. And then within government, we have a lot of auditors for the city and the school districts. They have to monitor their spend. And like I said, several agencies, so FBI obviously is a big one. Our ACFE started from former FBI agents, so they can get that credential. Some of them are agents with guns, some of them are the analysts that sit at a desk and do equally important work finding out what happened. The Office of Inspector General, Department of Justice, I really enjoy reading the Department of Justice press releases. That's where I find out about a lot of fraud, because if they got involved, they're going to put a press release about it, and so those are pretty detailed and pretty interesting. And then the SEC and also Adult Protective Services was one that I recently learned about. So even here in our county, they have Adult Protective Service officers that are CFEs, so they can investigate when some kind of fraud or financial crime happens to one of the seniors or disabled adults that they help service. So it's pretty interesting what all that is involved. I've also met some, on the right-hand side here, some private investigators and law firms. So law firms do have forensic divisions as well to help litigate or prosecute cases of fraud. And then just we have a lot of CFEs that work for the ACFE and help just with our training and our governance. And we have a lot of CFEs that work in like universities, or maybe they're accounting professors and they want that background. So there's a lot of different career paths you can have. Yes.
The stuff, the information on the screen, is this available on the ACFE.com?
Yes, sir. I think most of this should be on there. And if you all have any thing that you can't find, and you can have this PowerPoint, but if there's something that you are having trouble finding, I put my information there and our website at the Fort Worth chapter and the global ACFE's website. So if you go to the ACFE's website, there's a section called resources, and they'll have a lot of free resources listed, like I mentioned. And it's a pretty detailed website. So if you get lost, let me know and I can help you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Comments?
Well, we have a couple of
Yeah.
CFEs here. Do you want to start off and give a little bit of your background before I do?
It's fine. I've been a CFE for 33 years, and
Speak up.
started my career within the law enforcement side of it, obviously, and then went corporate. But it was interesting. I had the privilege of getting to know Dr. Wells back when it started. Oh, I don't need that.
Yeah, you do.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had the privilege of getting to know Dr. Wells. And then first, at the very beginning was interesting because you had a lot of CPAs. A lot of people were very strong, as Courtney was saying, in finance. And then a lot of law enforcement people coming along, like myself, that were, criminal investigators. And brought the two together, which a lot of CPAs, you'll see a lot of CPAs that are CFEs now, and vice versa, a lot of officers. So it's been an interesting career. And like I said, I started off with And a lot of it was manipulation or internal thefts, like within the corporate world. It was always interesting because so many managers want that bonus at the end of the year, and a lot of times their minds kind of drift away a little bit, and they get a little bit,
Greedy.
yeah, they get a little greedy, and they like that bonus. But anyway, it's just interesting, and in law enforcement part of it, or in the corporate world of it. But that was one of the main reasons it all came together. And like I said, I had the privilege of getting to know Dr. Wells, and there's another gentleman by the name of Jim Ratley. There was former Dallas PD, about the same time I was former Fort Worth PD. And we got to get a chance to talk and put ideas together. So it's been very interesting. So and I've enjoyed it.
As you know, I'm a career military officer, and if you'll put that slide back that you had right there. Fortunately, after I retired from active duty, and I'll start off there to begin with, that I got into the ACFE on the very ground floor of it with Dr. Wells and Ratley. I was one of the first military people to become a member of CFE, and because it wasn't looked upon at the early stages of the organization as being something that the military ought to be involved in. But that fast changed their mind by the expansion of the CFE organization from its initial start to fruition in just a couple of years. It went from zero to the organization that it is today. Because everything was done very professionally, and everyone that was working with the organization had extreme backgrounds. I happened to be working at the time on active duty. I was a chief of staff for resource management at a major Army command. Obviously millions of dollars in the budget every year, and therefore I was a prime target for looking into the potential for crime internally within the organization. And so fortunately I got in with Dr. Wells and Ratley, and we worked very close together, and as a result we started the Washington, D.C. chapter, and I was involved in that. One of the advantages of being involved in the Washington, D.C. chapter is that all of these federal agencies have a inspector general, a fraud detection team or something like that, but there was no cohesion or spread of knowledge from, let's say, Department of Justice and the VA. And after I got off from active duty, I actually went to work as the VAIG, and consequently, that's the reason that I became very involved in this organization once I was nominated by a friend of mine who was a professor of accounting at the University of Pennsylvania. And he and I were good friends, and he heard about the organization, told me about it, and so we got in right from the very beginning. And it certainly has been a great organization, and they set the standards high to begin with, and they've never lowered them. They've always maintained that the people that get involved in the organization have to maintain the highest of standards. Now I'd like to digress for just a moment on one particular case, and it's probably the most unusual case, that certainly the one I ever worked, because I'll get to the bottom line very quickly, and that is, after I did the investigation, the man committed suicide. In this particular case, it was with the VA, and I got interested in it because I was out doing a IG inspection at a hospital, and I was sitting in this administrator's office, and he had two phones on his desk. One was black and one was green. And I thought, this is kind of unusual. And so I asked him, I said, what's the green phone for? He says, oh, that's our T1 lines. Does anybody besides maybe,
I know what it is.
okay, T1 lines are very, very expensive, especially at the beginning. They run them, at least at the time I was doing this investigation. But I was talking with him and I said, okay, what's a T1 line? And he told me it was a high-speed internet line, very expensive. And I said, well, what do you do with it? Well, we transmit information from one hospital. We have 72 hospitals in the VA. We have 72 of these around the country. I said, every hospital has one? Yes, every hospital has one. I said, well, how often do you use it? Oh, I've never used it. We have 72 hospitals. We have a T1 line in every hospital. The line cost, at that time, $1,800 a month to rent. And now he's telling me he never used it. Needless to say, I finished up the one audit that I was there on, but then I went back to headquarters in DC and immediately started investigating this particular situation. What I found out was that over half of the VAMCs, which is Veterans Administration medical centers, we're not even using them. So now we have at least half of the 74 are not even being used. We're paying $1,800 a month. Why? So I started investigating this. Well, this can become a very long story, but I'll make it short. The point was that the VA had a problem, and that was that they had a policy that the person who was acting as the purchasing agent. Now, somebody had to approve the idea of putting these T1 lines into every hospital. I never did exactly find out how that happened, but the purchasing agent who let the contract out to the electronic company that furnished these lines also approved the monthly invoices each month that came across his desk. So, what do we have here? We have an individual who's approving all these invoices every month for T1 lines that were not used. Very large amounts of money that we're talking about. Anyway, make a long story really short, I investigated this and I was ready to turn it over to the Department of Justice. Now, belonging to the Washington, D.C. chapter, which I did, and we had IGs and other auditors and inspectors and any other title you wanted to use, of all the federal agencies were CFEs and belonged to the Washington DC chapter. So I called up my counterparts and we presented a case which was ready to go to the Department of Justice for prosecution. And the purchasing agent in DC, headquarters of the VA, I started investigating him because he's the guy that's approving these invoices. How's he getting the money? Well, I really didn't get that far into it because, for instance, I found out that he had 3 different foreign cars in 2 years, lived in the northeast section of DC, which is where all the politicians and all the rich people of DC live, and also that he was a GS-12, which in DC at the time is probably in the neighborhood of $24,000 a year. You know, now how is he affording these homes, these cars on that kind of salary? Did his family inherit? Did he inherit some money, something like that? Well, I say, I was ready to turn the case over to the Department of Justice, and the man committed suicide. So that's the end of my story. But we did get those T1 lines. The only thing that made me mad about this whole case was the fact that when I finished, I had it all planned out exactly how much money the company owed us for use of lines that we didn't use. But I knew politically, because I was getting a lot of political flack about this, but I knew politically I never could get a claim against the company. So what I tried to get them to do, and this is where I'm sad to say my boss wouldn't support me on it, but what I tried to do is to say, okay, what we'll do is we will stop paying you these fees on these unused lines until the rest of the bill is worked off, and therefore there's no, the company doesn't, I don't want to use the name of the company does not want to pay back this money,
Sure.
but since we have an ongoing obligation to pay them rent on other phone lines and that type of thing, work off this excess payment that they received for non-working lines. Well, the VA, in their infinite wisdom, decided that I had accomplished my goal, and therefore they were not going to try to recoup this money from the company. But again, I think there was politics involved in that as well. Any other questions?
Hey, Ronnie. Ronnie, if you're interested, you can actually go to that ACFE.com, and there's a lot of these different types of thefts and frauds cases that are on there.
That's right.
You know, and they give you the opportunity to look at it. I know with Young Brands, when I had, the Southwest United States, you investigated from a cashier all the way up to the vice president of the region. There's so much theft and fraud involved. Someone stealing $100 a week up to somebody thousands of dollars, a month. Just thousands of dollars that are stolen per year in these different corporations. But that's a great website, and also as Courtney was talking about, the AARP.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. That case, there's a lot of senior information on those websites. So it's a lot of good information out there.
Any other questions for any of us or Courtney? We have
Thanks for what
a,
you do, folks, we appreciate what you do, what you've done, and continue to try to help those of us that are not knowledgeable.
it really is fascinating. You know, like I say, I got into it because of this professor friend of mine from University of Pennsylvania that first introduced me to the organization, and I got in on the ground floor, thankfully. And because, of course, I was on active duty at the time, and then when I got off active duty, I went to work for the VA IG's office because I'd been doing IG work on active duty as well. So I had a long history of working in that field, and he nominated me for the organization, and I ultimately became a member, passed all the tests and that type of thing. Got in on the ground floor of it, and the seminars are all very, very professional, and they usually have 2 a year. Are they doing more than that now?
They do have their large conference. They have a USA conference every
Right.
year, and then a global conference that's international every year, and then they do a lot of, like you said, the
Okay.
seminars and smaller training.
Right, and getting together with a lot of people like yourselves that, you know, have experienced these things or investigated them, we learn so much from it. Of all the conferences I ever went to on active duty and so on and so forth, the ones that were the most interesting were the CFE conferences, because they're just a joy to hear, but also to learn from. I mean, the Ponzi scheme, as an example, they had him one year talk about how he set that up and everything like that. All sorts of different, I don't remember all of them, to tell you the truth. I haven't had to work in it now since, of course, I've been here. But I did, when I left the DC chapter, I was given this certificate of appreciation for my work over a 27-year period of working crime and fraud and that type of thing. And I helped start the Washington, D.C. chapter. I didn't serve as president. I served as every other officer in the chapter except president. And I retired just as they wanted me to run for president, but instead they gave me this award instead. And I retired down to Killeen and started the Central Texas chapter, certified fraud examiners, covering Waco, Temple, and Killeen, to include the active duty, FBI, and other federal agencies. And we had the name of the trucking company there in Temple, I can't remember the name of the large truck. They cover the world as far as that's concerned. But anyway, several local, and of course federal agencies as well, because they had Department of Agriculture in Temple and other, we had the Temple Police Department, several other agencies involved. Okay.
A lot of diversity in those organizations. I was a member of the Dallas chapter and the Houston chapter, and there's a lot of diversity, a lot of different companies. It's really interesting. And if anybody ever needs any help, I mean, that's why, you know, Paul and I are here. We can help and refer or do whatever we can to help somebody if you feel like you've been a victim or you have a suspect, you know, a fraud or something. Be more than glad. And I'm sure Courtney would too. And thank you, Courtney, for your time and coming over and speaking to us.